This is a podcast, though. Nobody's actually going to be seeing us.
Actually, we are. We are live right now. So hello, everyone, and welcome to Wine, Women, and Words. And with me, of course, is Michelle.
Hello.
And joining us are authors Janet and Joyce for JJ Gesher. And we're talking about our book of the month, A Narrow Bridge. So thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Pleasure. Happy to be here.
Happy to be here.
Yes, and we had you on, I believe it was last February, or is it January? Almost a year ago now.
Right.
Crazy. So it's nice to have you back.
Thanks.
Yes, at this point, you're not guests, you're family. So just make yourselves a home.
Okay.
Hop in the fridge, do whatever you need to do. It's cool. So what is everybody drinking tonight? Michelle?
You have your wine.
Yes.
Oh, so I opened another one of my Wink wines. It's Alma Libre, and it's a Cabernet Sauvignon, and it's a little spicy, but I don't know if it's just because I still have like a different taste in my mouth, because I tried finishing the Rosa Obscura, but I've had it open for like 3 weeks now, so it wasn't tasting as good as it was before, so I decided to switch. So maybe I still have that taste in my mouth from this, but it's a little spicier than Rosa Obscura, but it's still good. It's just my taste buds need to adjust.
And Janet, Joyce, are you guys drinking with us tonight?
You know what? I can go grab mine. Oh, Joyce, you're ready. Because I got a little flustered because we were a little late. I poured my wine in the other room. I can go get it. Hold on.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I have a Chardonnay. What's your favorite Chardonnay?
Oh gosh. I think I'm trying to think of what my favorite Chardonnay is. Michelle, do you have a favorite Chardonnay?
I don't have a favorite Chardonnay. I have a favorite Riesling and a favorite white Zinfandel, but I don't know. Chardonnay has never really been my go-to wine
because it's
because it can be a little drier, but they're still good. I don't really discriminate against wine. I'm more of a whatever we have, I will drink. But for a long time, Rieslings were my favorite.
I like Yellowtails. Yellowtail has a good one.
Wait, Jen's back with her alcohol.
It's a Sauvignon Blanc, and I think I've opened it for a little too long. It's been sitting around, but the idea of
happens.
Wine and words is so appealing.
It is. It's a match made in heaven. I'm drinking a red as well, so we've got 2 reds, 2 whites tonight. I'm drinking a Passarola wine, and it's from Portugal, and it's very berry. And speaking of wine problems, my cork fell in my wine.
Drink the whole thing to get the cork out.
Exactly. I like the way you think, and I now have a new goal for the week. So yeah, otherwise it's really good. It's got a really nice berry finish to it.
I don't want to get too technical on this, but I just noticed it. This wine has some serious legs. I don't usually notice that, but I just took a sip and they actually stayed on the. I'm not a wine person, but I know that red has legs, and people who taste go like that to see what the legs are.
Looks like it has a beautiful color.
Mm-hmm. It is. It's very deep.
Yeah.
Without sounding too snobby. But it's good.
Well, if you guys want to give other wines a try, you can go to trywink.com/www podcast, and you can get $22 off your first order of wine through Wink. And you can see what those legs are that Michelle's talking about, because I have no clue what she's talking about.
Remind us where you are.
I'm in LA, and Michelle's in Chicago.
Chicago. Okay.
Yep, the frozen tundra right now. we got our first major, well, actually our first blizzard since we've lived here. But apparently it even had a name. My mom said that she watched her news in North Carolina, and we made the news out there. And it was Blizzard Bruce or something like that, or Winter Storm Bruce. I didn't realize that we had been named. But
and here we are in Los Angeles about to get a little rain, and like the media, it's like Storm Watch 2015. It's like 3 drops of rain and everybody's freaking out.
Well, yeah, I had immense traffic coming home from work today, and because there was rain on my windshield. Nobody could drive. I mean, we had to actually use these windshield wipers that we never use.
I know. The roads get really slick because it never rains. When I first came here, I came from Connecticut, so there was snow all the time. And I thought, oh my God, they're actually aiming their car at me. That's what they're doing.
And it is true. Yeah, we do get really slick. We don't get the ice, but that's between the water, and then we get the oil that goes on the roads that, they'll bring it all up, and then that's what will make it slick. Because I remember when I first moved out here too, I came from the East Coast, and I remember my aunt sitting me down going, okay, I know you might think you're okay in the rain because it's not snow and it's not ice, but let's have a little talk about the weather and how it affects your driving.
We got last February or March, I think, was the first time I drove in snow, and I started sliding when I tried to stop. And it was maybe like 2 seconds, and then my car stopped, but that 2 seconds stretched out for like an eternity as I saw the car ahead of me get closer and closer and closer.
It's terrifying.
And then fishtail too.
Yeah, you have no control. It's terrifying. Do not drive it on frozen roads.
Like life. Go with the skid. Go in the direction of the skid.
Turn into it.
Whatever that means. Goodbye.
Yeah, I haven't left the house since like Sunday at all. Like, I had my groceries delivered to us, so I didn't have to go anywhere. I've done Uber Eats a couple times, and I feel bad for the people who are bringing me my food, but not bad enough to get out and drive myself.
That is the way to do it.
Yes, it is. But, well, since we are here to talk about books. So we had you on earlier this year to kind of get an idea of A Narrow Bridge, and now we're ready to kind of dive into it. But I know a couple questions we're going to ask are probably going to be repeats just for people who didn't catch your interview the first time, but it's on our website, so you guys can definitely check it out. But so the whole, the gist of the story is really kind of about, self-discovery and picking yourself up after, in the wake of a tragedy, and everything that you thought you knew your entire life isn't really there to get you through the worst moment or the worst period of your life. So where did the idea for the basic storyline come from?
Janet, you want to begin, or should I?
Well, why don't you tell them about the song, and
Okay.
then I will pick up from there, okay?
Sure. The original idea, Jen and I worked together. We've worked together for 12 years as writers. We work in television, movies of the week, and then this is our first novel. And we were trying to come up with an idea, and that's always the hardest part, coming up with the initial idea for the story. And I was on the freeway, stuck in traffic, which is pretty normal for LA, on the way to Janet's house. And Ben Harper's song, Crying on the Church Steps, came on. And the lyrics are, I sat upon the church house steps with all I had lost and all I was blessed, raised my hand to the sky and hung my head and wept. And I thought, what would make somebody weep on the steps of a church? What would make that happen? And I went to Janet's house and I said, is this a story? And she went, damn right it is.
It was such a powerful image. And so often, you know, that's what you start with. You start with a picture, and then it becomes, especially because we work as a team, it becomes a very long series of questions of, you know, how did he get there? Who is he? What would possibly happen to a human being that would make him so bereft? And some of this is the experience of living in the modern world. I mean, we are fortunate that we have not been victims of terror, but it seems like the circles of loss are so close all the time. Mm-hmm. We just had one in Southern California, mm-hmm. in Thousand Oaks, and actually our road to getting published had to do with San Bernardino, two places that you probably would never have heard of had there not been acts of terror. Mm-hmm. But I think that was kind of the original idea. Was it came from that image, and then it came from many discussions of how somebody could, what is the worst thing that possibly could happen to a human being, and then how does he claw his way out of it?
Right.
So does that answer the question?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Right. And a narrow bridge is from a rabbinical quote from the late 1800s, and it's, life is a narrow bridge and you must not be afraid. And because every day in a million different ways, we have little tiny bridges to cross. And then sometimes they're huge bridges. Right? And Janet and I talk about this all the time. If I had to cross, I'm afraid of heights. Mm-hmm. So I had to cross one of those swinging bridges in the jungle. Right? I would have to get down on my hands and knees. Somebody would have to get in front of me and go, you can do it, you can do it, you can. And I would have to crawl across that bridge. And when somebody finds that kind of bridge psychologically in their life, in other words, this man loses everything that he holds dear. How the hell do you get across the bridge? How do you wake up another day? How do you get through the day and the next night? How do you do that? And that's what we wrote. It was about how somebody found their way back to living when they thought that everything around them had died.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that. And there was actually a quote, a line that stuck with me from the book. Grief became familiar, the only place she felt comfortable and loyal to her husband's memory. Mm-hmm. And that stuck with me because, I mean, that's so very true of grief when you're grieving somebody in particular. I see grief all the time because I work in an estate planning office. So people are constantly coming in for the trust administration. So we're seeing, the family deal with the grief. And so that rang so true with me in that situation. When it came to exploring that grief and exploring coming out of that grief, what kind of research went into that, or what feelings went into that? Did you really put yourself into the character's shoes in that, or was it, did you consult maybe some grief counselors? Or
can I respond first to the grief and then also talk about his way out, because they're really two different questions. I have an old friend who lost a child, and she is a lawyer, and she's also a bit of a writer, but she doesn't write fiction, but she writes a great deal about living with grief. And I will admit that I called on the feelings that I learned from her, not on the words that she wrote, but on the depth of her, I mean, and she's still many years past that. And so for Jacob, the loss of his wife and his children, it wasn't even one child, it was everything. And so I think that had to do with, of course, we read, everybody has access to so much information now, grief support groups. I mean, you can just, with the tap of a finger, and we do this all the time. Research to me is one of the joys of writing. I love to learn about new topics. So it was a combination of, and of course, I mean, this is, life imitating art. Joyce and I have both experienced quite a bit of loss in the last 10 years or so that we've been working together.
But you know what? There's also this about loss. There's 2 different kinds of loss, or there's probably 12 different kinds of loss. But in death, if somebody is sick for a long time, there is a preparation that happens. But when somebody dies instantly, either through an accident or through terrorism or through something dreadful that happens, that's different. That adjustment is different because you have no time to prepare. You have no time to imagine. You only have the reality. And do you deal with it? Do you avoid it? And that's where some research went in with Jacob, with the main character, because we talked to psychiatrists and we said, so what happens to people in these circumstances? Do they ever dissociate? Do they ever split off from who they are? And it's very common that people go into a fugue state and because the brain just cannot handle it, cannot handle the trauma, cannot handle the reality. And that's what Jacob does. He goes into a fugue state, which is what takes him from New York to the South in that state. Because
and that feels so extreme. And I feel like also one of the things that might have played a role into it, not just the fact that it was his wife and child, but like the age of them, that, you know, to lose a child, as I can only imagine, I'm not a mom yet, but I can only imagine how awful that is.
Un-American.
Yeah, like with your friend. And there's also, from an outsider's perspective looking in, the age thing. When somebody is elderly, you can say, oh, they've had a good life.
Right.
They've done all of these things. But when somebody who's younger dies, there's also that loss of hope and the loss of that potential.
There's the loss of the future. Future goes away. That's one of the things that we discussed in it with one of the characters. When her only child dies, the future changes. Just for her.
Julia's parents.
Yeah, everything that she imagined is different.
But to address also the question of coping, and Jacob had a coping mechanism. I mean, we really realized we imagined a whole person. And I mean, a lot of it was having to go back and fill out this person. And one of his faults, and he's got many, is that he runs away. And it's a pattern that he has had throughout his life. You know, he left his community and he got involved in music, and then he got involved in drugs, and then I mean, all of these things, that this was the way that he coped. And that is a mechanism. It's not a very healthy one, but it was consistent for him. Right. And so he was running to Alabama, to the strangest, craziest place, that the farthest place from his own reality, was really consistent for how he had dealt with things in the past. This is just more extreme because the circumstances were so much more extreme.
Well, and also, I mean, not only did he lose his entire family in 1 second, he saw it happen. You know, it happened right in front of him. So, I mean, reading, you know, you go into the story and like, you know that the wife's gonna die. You know that something bad is happening. So reading up to that scene and the whole, his. I can't remember if it was his son or his daughter, but his daughter said, I'm going to go to the back and I'm going to wave to you. And, I am a mom, and reading that and knowing like this is probably it. Like I can't even read scenes like that without like you immediately place yourself into that situation. Like what, like God forbid, what if something like that ever happened to me? How would I react? And you just can't. You can't even.
Yeah, you can't wrap your head around it. I know, you cannot wrap your head around it. And when we first sent this out to publishers, remember, terrorism, death, these are difficult subjects for people to consider. And the publisher said, you know what, we're going to pass on this, right? Because essentially what she said is, this is the truth. She said, we just published a book that had Jewish content. We don't want to publish another book with Jewish content. They're not a Jewish publisher. They're just a publisher, right? So, okay, fine, thank you, right? And then San Bernardino happened, where there was killing, a terrorist killing. And we called her up and we went, with the way the world is going, might you reconsider? And she went, done. Right. Because
I'm thinking about how fairy tales help children cope with the things that frighten them, you know, which is death, the loss of a parent, being lost. I mean, I just saw the new Mary Poppins, you know, it's always a story. There's prime, you know, there's paradigmatic stories, forgive the big word, of the most basic of human fears. And this really is the most basic of human fears. Yeah. But it's a hard sell. People, but I think just like children use fairy tales to work through how would I survive, I think that was some of the thinking behind the novel, is that, of course, it's painful, but how would I survive?
And the feedback we get from people who have read it, reviews are amazing. Where people go, oh my God, I could not put it down. Oh my God, I had to turn one page after the other. So it's because the story of survival is not death. It's the story of survival that becomes compelling. So how do you survive?
Yeah, what happens to I mean, we see in these stories, unfortunately, all too often, we hear about the deaths of all these people, the names that go through on the news, but we never hear about what happens on the other side, what the parents have to go through, what the husbands, wives, siblings have to go through. Sandy Hook on a regular basis, those parents. And I mean, and I knew people who were at the San Bernardino shooting.
Really?
Yeah, I knew somebody. I was in one of my Buddhism 101 classes. One of my fellow classmates, she was there when it went down, and she had survived it. And then a friend of a friend had actually gotten killed at the thing. And so it's one of these things where it's, even though we don't want to deal with the subject, is something that we have to deal with. And it's nice to have something where we can turn to a character and turn to a book where they come out the other side of it. When we can see and explore it. And stories are important to society because of that. Because of that very factor, that stuff that you guys talked about, it's why stories are so important to us. Why, we turn to movies, we turn to television, we turn to books. That's how we cope with our reality, regardless of whether we're, scared to death to cross that narrow bridge, or we're, it's nice and big and broad and we're skipping down it.
Storytelling, the act of storytelling, is at the root of our communication, human communication. From the very beginning, sitting around the fire, telling the story about going out and killing the antelope and running away from the lion, right? It's storytelling. It's traditional, ritual storytelling, because it makes the monster knowable. It makes the unknown knowable. And it can bring everybody back to some kind of place where you go, I get it. We're all in this together.
And I think that's one of the other messages that's in this story, is that, we're all in this together. Because, I mean, to bring it away from the grief a little bit, let's talk about a bit of the cultural, different cultures that we have going on in here. We've got the Southern Baptist, African American culture, and then we also have the Orthodox Jewish culture, which I'm not super familiar with that. I have a tertiary knowledge of it, the basics, but it really struck me in the very beginning when Jacob, and I forget his wife's name, Julia, thank you. When he and Julia first started dating, and that scene where they're walking down the street and they couldn't even touch. And she had that strapless dress on, and he wouldn't even look at her. And I came from a very religious, super strict religious background, and I'm so very the opposite of that now. And I was like, excuse me, when that was happening. But it's, something that's
it's still true. It's a choice that they make to cover up and not. And if you don't come from that world, it just is. It seems so illogical and counter the modern world. But that is what she bought into, and she buys into it with her eyes open.
Mhm.
Julie finds Jacob's way of life very appealing because there is something very appealing about being part of a close-knit community. They do take care of each other.
Mhm.
Both Joyce and I have Orthodox family. Neither of us are practicing, or I mean, neither of us are religious in any way, but we both have Orthodox family. So that way of life to us was very familiar. And we had to do some research, and we did talk to cantors, and I mean, there were people along the way that we needed to fill out our story, but at least the Orthodox world was familiar to us. The African American world was something that we had to immerse ourselves in. And it was an interesting, it was probably one of the greatest experiences I've ever had as a writer, was going to a gospel church here in Los Angeles. Joyce, why don't you finish the story?
We went to a local cantor, and we said, because cantors often deal with churches when they do intergenerational, interreligious, interfaith activities. I said, what's the best gospel choir? And he told us it was the broadest ministry in Pacoima. So we called up there and made an appointment and explained what we were doing, and could we come to Sunday services? And with open arms, completely welcomed. And it was an extraordinary relationship that we were able to develop with the choir master.
Mhm.
Mr. Day.
Yeah, Mr. Day. That's his real name, is Mr. Day. There is a real Mr. Day.
We named the character after the real person.
And,
I love that.
and it was an extraordinary opportunity. And it allowed us to see something, not just on a surface level, but on a much deeper level, that we hoped we allowed to resonate within the story.
The broadest ministry is here in a suburb of Los Angeles, and we created a church in a small town in Alabama. But what the spirituality, the beauty of the music, the way the people reacted to the words of the pastor, I mean, all of that really came out of our experience with this broadest ministry. So that really was a fantastic experience.
That is the best part of writing. It is research. It's research. And you go, oh, now we know something new that we didn't know before at all. Now we can make this up.
Yes, I am right there with you. Historical fiction nerd.
Oh, right. That's right.
Yeah, so I am all about.
Right?
Yeah, Garibaldi. Yep.
I remember that.
Thank you. I'm working on trying to get an agent for that right now, but yeah, I love the research, and I started on the second one because there's no time like the present, and all sorts of new research and finding out new things and learning about history. For me, it's learning about history that I was never taught in school.
Right.
Teddy Roosevelt is forever on my shit list, to put it bluntly, after some stuff that I've learned.
Oh,
but yeah, you get. I'm sorry.
He did a lot of good things. He did the national park, but he was also a hunter. So get that one out.
He was also. I learned. Okay, so to digress here just a little bit, the second book that I'm researching right now takes place in New Orleans, and it's about the largest lynching in U.S. history. It happened to a group of 19 Italians, and in the late 1800s.
Wow.
Yeah, and so after it happened, there was a really tense situation. Italy pulled all of its ambassadors from the United States. There was talk of war. Southerners were like, well, I will fight with a Northerner again, because this isn't that long after, the Civil War. And they're like, I'll fight shoulder to shoulder with a Northerner if it means I get to kill some Italians. Yeah, and so in one of Teddy Roosevelt's letters to his sister, he talks about how he met the Italian delegation just before they got pulled, and they were really upset about what happened in New Orleans. And he says to his sister, I told them I didn't care. That, he's like, frankly, I see this as a good thing to happen to these Italians. He considered them to be pests in the country. And so I read that and I was like, everything good that you have done, I can't respect you anymore. especially given the fact that I'm half Italian. You're dead to me.
Yeah, I just we're digressing. I'd love to go back to the book, but I just I listened to a podcast about Jefferson, and he was actually, he was anti-slavery. He thought that slavery was a terrible thing, while he owned hundreds of slaves and fathered children with one of and it was political expedience. Because if he, the feeling that if he put all of his energy into fighting slavery, then he would not be able to, become a vice president and then president and then make the changes to make a more democratic society. Whatever, I don't know. They're all flawed human beings.
Exactly, and that's the importance of having flawed characters and flawed, because people are flawed. People that we read about in the history books are not perfect people either. Not by a long shot.
And they're complicated. And complexity is the truth of human nature too, is that people are very complicated, and they're rarely consistent. Rarely.
Yes, and speaking of the complicated and rarely consistent people, bringing it right back to the book, I liked Rosie. She was a character I quite enjoyed. Talk to me a little bit about her. What went into creating her as a character? Because, I mean, we've got a lot about Jacob and we've got a lot about Julia, but what about Rosie?
Well, I think one of the more interesting aspects of it from our viewpoint is that people will always pose the question about social appropriation. How can you, as a white woman, write a black woman, right? And what we did was we didn't write her as white or black. We wrote her as a woman. It's just a woman, right? Who's gone through whatever she's gone through in her life, and that is how we found who she was.
Yeah, that her color is of course, it's part of her identity, and you cannot be colorblind because that's innocent. That's nonsense. It's not true. You have to deal with issues of race. But most importantly, we wanted these characters to be truly human, and she is more governed by her personality, by the fact that she's been, she was in an unhappy marriage, that she's a single mother, that she's trying to figure out her own trajectory in life. That is more who she is than the color of her skin. And that was really important to us. Of course, she's an English teacher, and we love English teachers.
Yes, we do.
So
English teachers were some of my favorite teachers.
That was just part of who she was. That is who she was. And it's very subtle. I mean, like the fact that she named her son Langston. Not everybody gets that,
Langston Hughes. Yes.
The great African American poet. And she went to Spelman College. But these are not things that determine who she is in any way. She's just a woman.
And I thought and this could just be my take on everything, but I felt that Rosie kind of represented the strength that Jacob needed to find in himself. Like, she had already gone through her own stages of grief, becoming a single mother and finding, a way to stand on her own feet. She kind of represented the finish line that Jacob needed to get. Is how I
You're breaking up. It's hard to hear you.
Thank you. I was just gonna bump in.
Am I back?
Uh-oh. We lost her.
Oh.
Better. No.
Damn.
Wait,
I think we've got you back. Are you there?
I'm here.
Okay.
We wanted Rosie to grow and change as well. It's not just Jacob's journey; it's her journey too. In the final, or one of the final scenes before he goes back to Brooklyn, when his mother's come down to take him back to New York, and she says to him, "We breathed new life into each other." I fought for that line, okay, because that was really important to me. Because yes. She tries to rescue him. He can't be rescued. He has to rescue himself. That's how she's always operated. She's always trying to fix people. You can't fix people. You can be present and allow them to fix themselves. But she got so much from that relationship with him that was part of her healing too.
Mm-hmm.
Am I right?
Yes. Oh, I think so. I don't know if that was directed for Joyce. Yes, I think you were absolutely right. I like what she said. Michelle, now that you're back, can you go back, since you were breaking up? I know you were making a really good point, and I was trying to get really into it. Can you try to repeat that magic?
Oh, sure. Back to that moment. I was just saying, Rosie, I mean, you kind of brought me up to that too.
We can't hear her.
Oh.
Yeah.
We can see you, but we can't hear you. You're breaking up. So this is the fun part about the live portion that's here on YouTube. We have all the bumps and bruises, and then through the magic of editing on Spotify and iHeartRadio and iTunes, this will be all cleared up.
Oh,
Yes.
Can you make it look 40?
I think you look.
Yeah. Well, YouTube is a live one, so people will see if you're on the YouTube. I don't edit the YouTube. You still look very young and beautiful. But your voice, I can make your voice sound like you're 30. How's that?
That's good.
Really? Okay, we'll take that.
Any more questions?
I think
Can you hear me?
you're breaking up really bad, hon.
It's the snowstorm.
It is. We're gonna go with that snowstorm, because I think we covered all of my questions, and then Michelle had a bunch that she did not email to me ahead of time, because we didn't get that far. So I don't have Michelle's questions.
That's okay.
We have to, we can say a little bit about, we said our journey to get published and how the events in the world kind of got the publisher excited, but we are a year and 10 months into being published authors, and we're still, actively seeking our audience. We're working on a new book as well.
Ooh.
But we spent all of last year, or a great deal of time last year, going out and talking to book groups and talking to, mostly women, because mostly women are keeping fiction alive in this country, and trying to find our audience. And what we have found is that people who are moved by the book, the best thing they can do is pass it on.
Okay.
This really, it meant a lot to me. Or I found things in here of value, or else it's just like a good piece of fiction, and I stayed up all night reading. That's good too. We are readers. We were readers before we were writers. So we wanted to make a book that was very readable.
Yes, and it is very readable, and it's very relatable to this time. And for Michelle, since she cannot speak, she has been rendered mute. She did just text me her question, and what she wanted to talk about with you guys was she wanted to talk about Rosie's decision to go up to Jacob's mother and tell her where he is. Then I love that moment myself, because it was like, yay, meddlers. I'm a meddler, and I love seeing her meddle. Talk about that strength and that courage that she had to do that.
I don't know. I have to be honest. I don't know if it was strength or courage or meddling. It was mostly meddling. And because it was somebody cares about this man. And I have to go tell them that this man is still alive. They don't know if he's alive. I have to tell them he's alive. And that's a huge choice. You're choosing to meddle.
Yeah, and she doesn't know if he's choosing not to want them in his life. And it's so easy for us to put blinders on and be like, well, that's not my place. That's not my place to talk to this person. And
he's choosing, right? Something that most people do at one point or another in their life. My husband accuses me. He said, "What are you, the policeman to the world?" Right? Because I'll go, "Hey, yeah." It's much easier to not do that. It's much easier to say that's their business. I'll butt out. And every once in a while you meddle and it works out well.
Mm-hmm.
But it is not without consequences for Rosie.
No.
It's very hurtful what she's done because she didn't ask him. And that's what fixers do, is that they don't ask permission. And then they get themselves into heaps of trouble because of that. And we didn't, I mean, she does put her neck out, and it's a beautiful thing because it does bring mother and son together. But it also pisses him off.
And yeah, one of the things that Michelle pointed in her flurry of text messages that she just sent to me, because unfortunately, guys, her internet went out. So it is definitely the snowstorm. This is why we don't live with snow. Hi, Michelle. But I was going to, one of the things that she pointed out was, that she loved that conflict between keeping Jacob's trust and Rosie's maternal instincts, because, in a lot of ways, women and mothers are fixers. We go behind the scenes, we have to fix things, and that's, maybe part of the maternal instinct. And she was saying that was part of her maternal instinct. Did I get that right, Michelle? Test out your...
Am I here?
You are here!
You could identify with her desire to make things better, or at least to understand them completely, because that's a big part. She has, she's nosy Rosie. We know that from her childhood. She's always been one to stick her nose in other people's business, and she's very curious. That's why she's a reader and a thinker. And I mean, so it kind of made sense that she would go do this, but it got her into some trouble too. She does lose his trust.
Yeah, and I also thought, while I was reading that scene, I mean, there's obviously she doesn't want to betray him, but she can relate to his mom. I mean, his mom doesn't know where he is. She doesn't know if he went back to drugs, or, if he's dead in a ditch somewhere. So I just felt like she connected with this woman who lives halfway, in another world, really. But as a mother, she would want to know where her child was. And
those are the universal ideals that we wanted to explore, that these people who are from such different cultures, a mother is a mother, a human being in mourning is a human being, and needs another human being to bring them across the bridge. Those kind of universal truths were very important to us. And you're absolutely right. That is part of her impetus, is she says, what would it be like for me if my kid had disappeared?
And you know what? There is a universality to being a woman. I remember when I was pregnant, back when dinosaurs roamed the earth, but when I was pregnant, and I was petrified about going through childbirth with my first, because I didn't know what it was, and I didn't know what I was going to experience, and it looked awful. It looked terrible. And I was in the mall, and I was coming down on the escalator, and I looked down, and there were hundreds of women, and I went, they've all done this. They've all done this. They've all come out the other side. And that's where that common thing is, where you go, by virtue of biology, we are connected. We are connected. And that doesn't get explored enough. Right now in our society, the differences are always
highlighted.
They're always on parade. They are. And really what we have are similarities, far more than we have differences. So
I came up with a very philosophical, insightful point that I don't know is true at all. But we're talking about all these universalities that you're exploring with your characters. And in a way, they're all bridges that connect us to one another. So it's not just the bridge that he's crossing in this stage of his life. It's finding the bridges that connect him to other people.
Exactly right.
Absolutely. That's beautiful. I like that.
You're right.
I'm going to give myself a pat on the back for that one.
Make the bridge at the end.
For a metaphor.
That's right. What did you make of the bridge in the final scene? We're always, because when we talk to book groups, I'm obviously when we're discussing the book, always the end comes up, and I'm always delighted to talk about it. What did you think?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
You guys are totally, I can't hear you guys at all right now.
Oh no.
Sign language.
Can you hear us now, Michelle?
Oh.
Oh,
Oh, well, you'll have to edit it, and that will be our ending.
I know.
Our bridges to each other will be our ending.
And it's such a beautiful ending. Oh, Michelle. Oh, sometimes you just gotta know when to call it.
Oh.
Oh. Well, thank you so much, guys. It was, ladies, it was so lovely to have you, and it was so lovely to talk about it. This book, and guys, pick up a copy of A Narrow Bridge. It is available pretty much everywhere.
It's mostly easier to get it on Amazon.
You know, that's the way it typically goes with books, is to just go to Amazon. That's, I mean, we all do it. That's how I did my Christmas shopping.
Yeah.
It's the monster, but it's the monster of convenience, and it really is has revolutionized the way we shop. Do I really want to? You know, I've so much support independent booksellers and want them to be successful, but let's get real. Amazon is a great source.
Right.
It is.
So for your listeners and your viewers, it's called A Narrow Bridge.
Yes.
J.J. Gesher doesn't have to come up with a pseudonym because there's two of us. So it's Joyce and Janet, and the word Gesher means bridge in Hebrew.
That's right. Yes, I remember that now. Yes. So yes, I love it, and I will have a link to buy the book in our show notes for those of you watching and listening, so you guys can get that. And thank you again, and you guys be sure to join us next week. We have we're actually going to have our first cookbook author on the show next week. Yes, and we're going to be starting our book of the month, A Lost Vintage, or the Lost Vintage. So it's all going to be about wine in France and World War II.
Oh,
yes. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Pleasure. Wine, women, and words. We love it.
Thank you.
Good luck.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.